A reminder of the deep misogyny women face every day. That was the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon's reaction to a newspaper story about Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. The Mail on Sunday article detailed claims purportedly made by Conservative MPs that Miss Rayner crosses her legs in the Commons to distract Boris Johnson during Prime Minister's questions. Miss Rayner says the claims are desperate, perverted smears, and the Prime Minister's condemned the story. The Mail on Sunday isn't commenting. We're joined now by former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale, who's director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow. Good morning.
Good morning, Lucy.
Good morning. Just give us your reaction when you first read this story yesterday.
Well, I'd love to say I was surprised, and I think this is definitely a particularly egregious example. I mean, the idea that, Angela Rayner's defeating Boris Johnson's Oxford-based debating skills with the power of our legs alone is just a nonsense, and it's laughable, but it's an example of the extreme misogyny that women face in politics every single day. You're just hearing about this particular example because Angela Rayner is senior enough to have power and agency to call it out and demand that there are consequences for what has happened. But for a lot of women, they just have to quietly put up with comments like this on a day-by-day basis. And it's really, really disappointing and kind of depressing that despite the increased levels of women's representation we've got in politics across the United Kingdom, the culture hasn't changed anywhere near to the extent that it should have.
Should the paper have run the story at all?
So I think it would be a very different story if it had run with a sourced quote. So if we had known which Conservative Member of Parliament had said that, then there would be clear consequences, because it would be much easier for people like Angela Rayner and everybody around her that's supporting her to say, OK, if you don't think that the comments that person X said, as we've heard Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, and the Prime Minister both say, what are you going to do about it? Will you suspend them from their political party? Will you kick them out the House of Commons for a few days? What's the punishment for that behaviour if you think it's so unacceptable? My worry is that what will happen is nothing, that we'll just blink and move on and accept that this is part of the political culture that women have to live with, despite the fact there's an awful lot more of them in there now than there ever used to be.
This is what we were just hearing about. As you say, this is what's bubbling to the surface and is being widely discussed, and there has been widespread derision, hasn't there, across the board of this. But from your experience working in politics, are comments like this, misogyny in general, sexism, is that part of day-to-day politics for women?
I'm afraid it is, and it has been for a long time. And, I certainly faced it, but I faced less of it the more senior I became within my political party. And by the time that I was the boss or the leader, it was much harder for people to make these types of comments because you have power and you can use it. Until women have equal access to that power, they will face this imbalance within the political culture. What we have in our British political system, whether it's in the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly or the UK Parliament, is still an overrepresentation of men in power. And that creates a culture where casual remarks about clothes, about how women carry themselves, how they speak, a lot of what Angela Rayner faces is class prejudice. And for as long as that is the case, that there is an overrepresentation of men, we will face these systemic challenges. And I think it's on the men, actually, to demand that the culture changes. This isn't women's work, it's everybody's work to change this culture.
In a way, it's a vicious circle, though, isn't it? Because you say there's overrepresentation of men in politics. I'd imagine for many women reading the story yesterday and it might bring up situations in their own life. Are they going to want to throw themselves into politics knowing this might be something they have to face?
Well, I really hope that they do, because there's an awful lot of evidence that demonstrates that we make better public policy, that we get better politics when our elected representatives look like the country that they seek to represent. But there's no doubt this is a turn-off for women looking to enter public life, just as it is for people of colour, people with disabilities, people who are anything other than the male, pale and stale model that we're so used to in our political life. And a big part of the work we do at the John Smith Centre is trying to challenge that perception that politics isn't for them, to turn people towards parliamentary life, working around the civic society that supports working in politics, all with that goal of enhancing the quality of debate and enhancing the type of politics that we have. But this is no doubt a problem, just as social media is as well.
What was the culture like at Holyrood? Was it better?
Well, I think it's hard to draw direct comparisons because the systems are very different. The Scottish Parliament was designed to be more family friendly. I think that deserves real challenge now, 20 years into the devolution project, about whether it actually is. If you look at the last set of elections and some prominent women who stepped away, from Ruth Davidson to Gail Ross to Jenny Mara, lots of young women with young families would really question how family friendly it is. So, we like to say the Scottish Parliament's a whole heap better. And I remember, around the Me Too movement, there was calls for an investigation into sexual harassment instances in the Scottish Parliament, and some leading men saying, it's not a problem here, that's a Westminster thing. And then the Parliament commissioned a survey which showed that 30% of women on the parliamentary estate had experienced some sort of form of harassment in their time working there. And then everybody woke up. And the Scottish Parliament took it really seriously and put in a strategy across the board, including compulsory training for all politicians in the building. That was attempted at Westminster, but as I understand it, the training wasn't compulsory. So there's still the opportunity in the UK-wide system for people to check out, to say, well, that's not really a problem, or just to blink when they hear stories like this, say that's terrible and move on without anything actually changing. We have to change this political culture.
How optimistic are you that will happen?
Not terribly, to be honest, because I think Angela Rayner was right to say anybody who's offering her sympathy needs to do more than just say they're sorry. They need to demonstrate that things can change and take some material action. We should know who the MP is that made these comments, and we should create a set of circumstances where it isn't just on women to report this type of behaviour and call it out. Because every time you ask a woman to do that, you're asking her to step above or put her head above the kind of team environment that she's operating in, because female politicians have to make friends with their male counterparts. They have to do deals, they have to network, and they can't always be the problem. And that's what this culture creates, is it puts an expectation on the women to be the ones to call out the behaviour to drive the cultural change. We're making slow steps towards that cultural change because there are more women there, but that's not enough. It shouldn't just be on women in politics to do this. It's for everyone to demand the type of politics that we actually want.
OK, thank you very much for your time. That's the former leader of Scottish Labour, Kezia Dugdale, now director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow.